What is up, Father's Table? My name's Chance, one of your hosts here alongside my man Blake, and
Let's go.
we're excited for you to be here with us for season one, episode one. Even though we filmed this thing a million times already, you're here. Hopefully, this is the final time we're going to record this.
Yeah, yeah.
But man, Blake, today we're going to talk about the man, the myth, and the legend. The man being us, the myth being the myths about manhood, and the legend himself, Jesus Christ.
Mm.
But before we get in, man, what are some myths that you've heard about manhood? I know we've all heard them. For me, I think some of the things I hear is you got to, look a certain way. You got to have the muscles, or you got to drive the nice car. You got to have the house. You got to be successful. That's what makes you a man. What are some of those myths that you've heard going around about manhood?
Myths. Well, I'm Blake, just real quick, and just want to appreciate everybody that's here. It's awesome that you're choosing to spend your time with us, and I hope you get something from it today. And we're really looking forward to connecting with anybody who comes and joins the Father's Table and listens in, and we're going to make sure that we connect with as many people as possible, and hopefully you guys will learn something along the way.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. But yeah, man, I think in terms of myths, I think to your point is the way you look, I think is a big myth. Not just even physique wise, but just, do you have the things? Do you have the items? Do you have what it looks like to be a man? And I think there is part truth in some of that. Just with regards to, being a provider, being a protector, but that can look so many different types of ways. And so I think, there's not just one way that it can look to do that as a role as a man. So I think that's a big myth and a big misunderstanding in this world of manhood. And, I listen to a lot of interesting content on manhood, and I think there's a big push to kind of push men away from historical manhood, if you will.
What's historical manhood? What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, if you think just kind of historically looking at what the man played in relationship, in society, in any context that you can think of, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is like gladiator. You think of the gladiators, like people that are just ready to fight, muscular, can kill a lion,
That's me,
whatever.
by the way, Blake.
Yeah,
That's me.
for sure, for sure. I just killed a lion out in the backyard a few minutes ago. But that's kind of the idea or the picture of manhood throughout time. It's the warrior archetype, if you will. And I think we've been pushed out of that, both from there's not really a real need in our culture today to be killing lions per se. I don't know how many guys are going to be listening to this and are like, I killed a lion yesterday.
I mean, out
But
here in Arizona, man, we got to be killing those lions.
they're crazy out there. The only lion I see is at the zoo, and he's behind a glass wall, so I'm good. But I think that's hopefully we can dig into that a little bit.
Absolutely, dude. I think the hard part is you hear the phrase be a man, but everybody's got a different definition of what it means to be a man. Some people are that typical bravado archetype that you were talking about, but I think some men are so afraid to be manly that they kind of go to more of maybe a feminine nature. So we're definitely going to dive deeper into that and see what scripture says about that. But one of the things I found interesting, I was reading this article, and it says one of the most harmful phrases we can use with boys as they're being tired, failing, hurt, or experimenting with life is be a man. And then this author, Eva Weissman, she goes on to say, when a boy is told to be a man, it implies that he should fight back, suppress his emotions, show no pain, and never, ever cry. These subtle cues, especially when given repeatedly and intentionally over time, can lead to damaging and very real long-term effects, including depression, anxiety, and violence. And the thing that was crazy to me is when God created us as men, I don't think he intended it for us to have depression, anxiety, and violence attached to our
Sure.
manhood. But I
Sure.
think so many of us do. And I wonder, why is that? I've been asking myself that a lot lately. Why is that attached to our manhood these days?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, and I think it's interesting too. I even heard a statistic that's been thrown out there is actually men are actually struggling with suicide more than women are. I think it's a bigger attack on the male population than it is on the female population. Not saying that it's not in the female population, but it's more of an issue. There are higher statistics on the men's side of things, which you wouldn't think to be true, because I think men naturally, even just based off of how most men were raised, it is that kind of like, you know, rub some dirt in it. We don't talk about our feelings. You suppress it. You move on. And I think that, to your point and to that author's point, is it leads to pretty damaging effects. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think it's so damaging because when we're raising young men, we are trying to raise them not necessarily in God's view of manhood, but in society's view of manhood. Like you
Yeah.
said, don't cry, get up, you're
Mm,
fine, throw
yeah.
some dirt on it, be a man. Which again, those principles aren't necessarily bad principles. I think we just take them a little bit too far
Mm,
and maybe even don't explain to our sons why we're saying that. So we could say, get up, be a man, you're fine. Or we could say, son, let's think through
mm,
this. Are you really hurt right now? I know maybe that scared you. Maybe that's why you're crying. Let's talk about that.
yeah.
We're not very good at talking about things as men.
No.
Maybe it's just me. I don't know.
No.
But I think maybe that leads into some of that as to why we're just like, hey, be a man, be a man, be a
Yeah.
man. And then our sons see us and they're like, okay, well, what does it mean to be a man? And if they're not learning
Mm.
it from you, they're learning it from, their friends or their friends' dads or from the guys on TV, like the Vin Diesels that are out there, with the wife beater
Shouts
t-shirt
out to
on.
Vin
Just
Diesel though, like for real.
shout out to Vin Diesel. He's a great guy. But, I think Hollywood definitely portrays men in a certain light.
Yeah.
Again, on either end of the extreme. But I think for us as fathers, it's really important that we point him back to the Bible. Son, God created you in his image. And here's what that means. Here's the kind of God that we serve, a very loving, compassionate, kind God who sent his son to lay down his life. And that's what it means to be a man, is to lay down your life for others, to
Mm,
sacrifice for others.
yeah.
If that's the message that we're having about manhood, rather than son, be a man, and he's
Mm,
like, well, Dad, what does that mean? We
yeah.
have to we have to explain those things.
Yeah. Yeah, and not just leave it up to him to figure it out, because that's what they're doing. For context, me and Chance both have kids, and I've got two boys, 1 and 3. My 3-year-old is very curious. He's got 3 kids. He's got one boy, 2 girls.
I have
Um,
3 kids, not your son. Just
yes,
clarifying.
sorry. Chance has Chance has 3 kids. Thank you. And so, I think we're both in interesting phases with our boys. They're curious. They're starting to grasp as much of reality as they can, as 3 and town 6.
6. Yep.
6, as 6-year old, and it can in the world, and of course that evolves over time. But I think it's not only our duty to reflect fatherhood, manhood through our actions, but I think it's also super important for us to take the time to talk through it. And to your point, I mean, I'm not very good at it. Not to say that I'm a perfect at this by any means. This is something that I'm working on, and it's an area that I think the Lord has definitely grown me a lot in thus far. But I think also it's something that I need to grow in a lot more, because it can be so easy even just as a parent, is just you see things and you're like, okay, you, that issue that you have is not really that big. And I think that's where that kind of talk track comes from, where it's like, be a man, like, move on, get over it. You tripped over a book that you left on the ground and you fell, and it's your fault. But the same could be said if you think about God's role in this. Is he could look at our problems too. So like when we complain or we have a hard day or we run into major issues, I mean, he could fix it with the snap of his finger and it's all good, and he could do the same thing, but he doesn't. He allows us to go through that processing. And if we had our choice, if we had the option, I'm sure we would want to choose that time to, hey, God, what's going on? What's happening? I lost my job and I'm really struggling to pay rent this month, or whatever your situation is. Like, you'd want to talk about that with God. You'd want to talk about that with your Heavenly Father. And likewise, thinking of that same thing for our sons is, creating the space for them to have that opportunity.
Yeah, and you mentioned something there about money and paying rent. I think we as men attach our identity to things other than God most of the time.
Mm,
Money. I need to provide for my family, and we think that means money. I got to go get that paycheck and put food on the table. Again, not a bad thing. But I think for us is we have to understand that being a father is more than just providing for our family financially. It's
Mm,
providing for them emotionally. It's
yeah,
providing for them just in your time and giving them time. There's so many other ways and areas of our life that we need to provide for our
yeah,
kids. But in today's day and age, the dad goes out and he works, 50, 60 hours a week. And then he comes home and he puts on the sports game. And then he wakes up and does the same thing. And his kids
yeah,
maybe see him for 5 minutes.
yeah.
And I know for you, you work a lot, man. So how do you balance that? You're traveling, you're working out of the house a lot, your wife's staying home with the kids. How do you
Hmm.
balance that?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think for me, I'm still figuring that out. My schedule unfortunately is not consistent. One day it could be, I mean, last week I woke up at 4 a.m. and left the house before 5, 3 out of the 5 days last week, and didn't get home until either after or like right before dinner. And so, it's long days sometimes, and sometimes it's shorter. I think for me it's finding those pockets and cherishing them even when my body or my mind is telling me, hey, I want to sit down, I want to do this. It's like, you know what, like this season that I have with my son asking me constantly, will you play with me? And don't get me wrong, like there are times where I'm like, Ezra, like cannot right now, give me a second, I just need to sit. But mustering as much strength as I can to just get up and enter his world for a little bit and allow him to experience that time with me, because I know that it's so formative, it's so important for him. So I think taking advantage of those moments where it's like you want to sit and you want to rest, but taking advantage of those moments to say, you know what, I'm gonna even sacrifice that rest for my son because he deserves that and he deserves that part of me. Uh, I think another piece too is just taking care of yourself, making the right decisions. Like, are you staying up late and not giving your body the proper rest? Are you not working out? Or you're not eating the right foods? You're not spending time with the Lord. I think there's so many things that you can use as a cop out. Like, hey, like, well, I woke up at 4 a.m. this morning, so I can't work out, which I'm definitely have fallen victim to. Making those choices for yourself to say, hey, this is going to make me the best father I can be when I work out, or when I choose to eat the right foods, or when I choose to go to sleep early. So I think those things have been really helpful for me, and I notice a difference when I don't do that.
Absolutely. And I think being a parent is has to be one of the most selfless things that you do. Because you come home and, like you said, you're leaving before 4 o'clock. You're not getting home till dinner time. Some of those days you're traveling, but you want to come home and you want to do what Blake wants to do. You want to watch TV or whatever your vice is, man. Drink some coffee. I don't know.
Yep, you
But
know it.
we as parents have to come home and be willing to lay down our desires and our needs and spend time with our kids. And it could be something simple. One of the things I've been doing lately, I'm calling it 5 minute free time. I'm coining that
Mm,
phrase right here now.
there you go.
So when I walk in the door, before I walk in, I just pray to Jesus.
Oh,
God, I've had a long day. Help me be intentional with my family. Help me to go in there and just want to spend time with my kids. It can be something that simple. I walk in the door, I give each kid 5 minutes of my undivided attention. I set a
mm,
timer on my phone. The other kids, I say, hey, it's not your time right now. I'm spending time with Talon, or I'm spending time with Penelope, or I'm spending time with Eleanor. And we get to do whatever they want for 5 minutes. And man, the amount that fills up their cup is crazy, right? And it's only 5 minutes of your time. If you have three kids like I do, that's only 15 minutes. You can do anything for 15 minutes.
that's right.
As men, we sit on the toilet for longer than 15 minutes. So you could spend 15 minutes with your kids. And I had a leader at the church I work at, and he said, work life balance isn't always 50-50. Sometimes you're going to be at work 80% and home 20%. But what are you doing with that 20% to make it intentional?
Yeah,
And that's where the balance comes from.
yeah,
So maybe you're out of the house like you are, but what are you doing in that time at home and how are you making the most of it?
yeah,
That's what's important.
yeah. Yeah, because I mean, the reality is like work does play a huge factor, a huge role in the lives of families, and it can be a make or break type thing. Which, we're not neglecting that, but it's the opportunities that you do get to spend with your family. How are you using them? Are you on your phone? Are you watching a show? Are you being lazy? Or are you taking advantage of that time and sacrificing? And I love that idea. I love that you do that. I think that's really awesome. And I think the component of prayer, beforehand too is so crucial. I mean, it's the same when you approach the word and you pray and you just ask the Holy Spirit to speak to you and teach you. I mean, I think it's so important to invite Jesus into those moments, even the small ones that you wouldn't think like, oh yeah, whatever. It's like a little thing, but like it makes a huge difference and can open up your eyes to see things in your kids that maybe you wouldn't have seen otherwise, et cetera, et cetera. And to the point of work life balance, one thing that I heard a while ago, someone said there's no such thing as work life balance, it's work life harmony, because of the reason that it's never going to be 50-50. There's going to be seasons where it's a lot of work and a little bit of life. And then there's going to be seasons where it's a lot of life and a little bit of work. But are you finding the harmony within that? How can you find the harmony within that work life place?
Yeah. The thing that just kind of hit me when you said that is, why do we put work first?
Mm,
Like, even in our phrasing, work life balance or work life
yeah.
harmony, why don't we put life work harmony first
Mm,
or life work balance first? Because to be quite honest, man, and this is true of me too, work gets more of my attention than my family does. And the devil's like, yes, I love that.
yeah. Focus there.
Right? Focus on work. Pour
Yeah.
yourself into work. You get home, check your email. Work, 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 work.
Yeah.
Because we put so much value on it, but I think we attach that value to ourselves. If I'm not succeeding
Yeah.
at work, I'm not a successful man. If
Yeah.
I'm not succeeding at work, there's something wrong with me
Mm-hmm.
or there's something bad about
Yeah.
me. But if we're failing at home, we don't necessarily feel the same way.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing after that. I mean, it's your family is first. And I think too, the even the single guys that are going to be tuning into this, I think about them too is what are the things outside of your workspace that are life-giving, that are mission driven, like it's giving you a mission, a purpose, it's something that God is pushing you to do, like even thinking of it through that lens too, not just like if you don't have a family yet or something, then you know that whole dialogue might change, but the same principle is there. But to your point, man, I think what one thing that I kind of think about is kind of how our cell phones and laptops and work have all kind of meshed together and become one thing for us. Like I know for me, my email, all of the apps that I use for work, they're all on my personal phone, and that can overlay very easily. I do a lot of text messaging and phone calls for work as well, and so that overlaps, and it can be very easy to, even though you're off the clock, you check your emails, your text messages, your phone log, whatever. Even some, I'm in sales, and even sometimes I find myself checking my sales on the weekend, and it's like, why am I doing that?
Yep.
um, but it's just one of those things where a rewiring and retooling of your brain in the way that you're focusing on your family. And putting your family first. I mean, scripture is very clear about that, about possessions, about money, about family, and their role and their position in our lives, and in kind of that scale of value.
Yeah. And I think sometimes our work becomes an idol.
Mm,
And if we're not careful, that's what we begin to worship.
yeah,
And especially for you in sales, man, it's like, how many sales have I gotten?
yeah.
Or on the flip side of that, it's like, man, I haven't hit my goal for the sales this month or for this year or for this quarter. There's something wrong
Doesn't
with
happen
me.
for me, but I can understand what you're saying.
No, yeah,
Like,
but
yeah,
you know, I've been in the sales world. I understand that, and you start to place your value in this, and you start to almost worship it. And you checking it when you're at home, when you're off work with your family, like that's an idol, right? And there's nothing more important than your family,
yeah,
not
yeah,
work. I mean, except for God Himself, there's nothing more important than your family.
yeah,
But I think,
absolutely.
and I know I'm so guilty of this. I oftentimes switch those.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
man, because I feel comfortable failing at home
mm,
because I know they're gonna be there, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
on the work side, it's like, oh, what if I get fired? What if
yeah,
this happens?
yeah. No, that's deep. I mean, I think that's true, and I think another thing too is work can often be, at least for my line of work, sales. It can be, for lack of a better word, transactional, where it's like I do X and I can see Y. And oftentimes our families aren't like that. It's very ambiguous. The track is very zigzaggy back and forth. You can be dialed in super hard on one thing, and you don't see the fruits of it for a while, and that could also be super discouraging. Whereas like maybe you're in a line of work where it's like you get to do something that results in another thing and that's rewarding. And it's kind of like that positive feedback loop and that becomes more important. Whereas like being in the trenches with your family can be really hard. It can be really painful. It can take a lot of time. And I can see that being something that really kind of holds people back and pushes them back to focusing on work because hey, this is where I'm getting all my positive affirmation. This is where I'm seeing success. And you just forget about the other side.
It's interesting you mentioned that because you said if you do X, you can see Y pretty immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And with our families, you mentioned that takes a long time.
Mm,
But the question is, what's at stake? If you don't do X, then what happens down the road? What is Y down the road? Going back to this article I was telling you about, it said according to Terrence Real, he's a psychotherapist and the author of Don't Want to Talk About It. Difficulty with intimacy, workaholism, alcoholism, abusive behavior, and rage are really attempts to escape depression and escape the stigma of being anything less than a man as they were told to be when they were growing up. And these escape attempts only hurt the people they love and pass their condition on to their children. And so the cycle viciously continues. So if we as fathers aren't doing X, we're not putting in that time with our kids, we're not showing them what it means to be a man, or we're giving them the improper vision or view of what it means to be a man. That's the why, man.
yeah.
That's the why that comes later on down the road. And we get to a point and we're asking ourselves, where did we go wrong?
And it's never just one singular moment.
Never.
Obviously people can make mistakes. Maybe people are unfaithful or whatever. But even that is a culmination of decisions that you make as a person that leads to the result there. And so I want to be encouraging in that too, is that it's never too late to make an effort to turn things around, to start to shift your thinking, to shift how you're approaching it. I think that's really important, and I think you talked about this before to me of having that mental inventory, kind of like allowing whatever thing to reflect back on you, whether it's scripture, whether it's something like a podcast or a book or something, to allow it to kind of show you a reflection of where you're at and take mental inventory of, hey, this is kind of where I'm at, and be honest with yourself. This is where I'm at. This is where I'm falling short, and this is how I can be better. Because I think it's important to really do that. But none of us are perfect, and we're all going to fall short, and we're all going to make mistakes, and we're all going to miss it. But how are you going to respond to that? And how would you respond to that? Chance, like maybe think of an example where you found yourself, hey, I don't really love that I do this, or I don't really love that I did that. And how did you respond? How did you change it?
Absolutely. I think I'll preface with this. I tell my son this all the time. I say, son, choices have consequences. Sometimes they're good, and that's called a reward. Like if you make a choice and you do the right thing, you get a good consequence. That's a reward. Sometimes that's a bad consequence that you're choosing to get based off of your actions. So choices have consequences. And what I had to come to realize was for a long period of time, especially when work gets busy and you're tired and you're stressed, my natural instinct is to come home and just kind of shut down, to turn on the TV, to I just put my feet up, to, man, I've had a long day. And again, that's being selfish, where I had to switch my thinking of, well, my kids haven't seen me all day. They've been waiting all day for dad to come home. But when I come home and I ignore them, I put my feet up, I watch TV, I'm crushing their hopes for the day. And that might have been the only thing they were looking forward to that day. So
Mm,
again, being a father and being a husband has to be the most selfless thing that you do. You have to ask yourself the question in that moment, what is best for my family and my kids?
yeah,
Or you come home, do the opposite of what you want to do. Whatever comes to your mind, do the opposite of that.
yeah,
Be
yeah,
there for your family. And I think
yeah,
that's a good transition. We've talked a lot about kids, but I think this does apply to our wives as well. How do we be intentional with our wives when we walk in the door? How do we be intentional with our wives? Are we checking our email when they're having a conversation with us? Are we looking at our phone when we're sitting there watching TV, not talking to them? That's not being intentional. That's just being next to them in the same room. And I think sometimes we confuse that. What are some ways that you and Christina are just intentional with the time that you guys have together?
yeah. You know, we are still working on that. I think that's something that is ever changing and ever evolving. One thing that we do like to do is we like to take inventory on Sunday evenings, which is actually when we're recording this. So after this, we're gonna go do that, and we kind of revisit the week and kind of check in with each other. Hey, what did I do well? What made me happy this week? What can I be better at? How can we move forward together in some shared goal or whatever? And kind of revisit things with each other. I think that's one way that we try to be intentional. But a big one is with phones, is not allowing phones to get in the way. And I for sure am worse at it, where I'll try to multitask, or at least I think I'm trying to multitask, and I'm terrible at it. It's
Fun
like,
fact, you can't actually multitask.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And I'm like looking and I'm like kind of listening, and you get caught in those moments where it's like, what did I just say? And you like say it back verbatim, but they're like, you weren't listening.
Yep. You might have heard
And
what I said, but you weren't
yeah,
listening.
you weren't listening. And so I get that a lot, which definitely need to be better. But those are some ways that we try to do. We do try to do weekly check-ins and like take inventory of where we're at, what we're doing well, because I think it's important that we're doing that, reward of, hey, I really appreciate how you've done X, Y, and Z. Um, how can I be better? And how can you be better? And just be honest with each other and provide a space. One thing that we just added recently was um, providing a space that if something happened this week, where maybe we didn't get to talk about something that, hey, that frustrated me on Tuesday that you did this is that time to do it. And so allowing space to even bring up stuff like, hey, I didn't have a chance to talk to you about this, but I didn't like how this happened, and so let's talk about it. So I think it just provides that space to be vulnerable and talk through some stuff.
I think that's a great exercise for guys to do at home. I think to add to that, even, is before you go into that conversation as a husband, you take mental inventory of your week with your wife and your kids. Like if you went to your wife and you're like, honey, this week, I'm sorry that this happened, or I did this, or I didn't do this, or I was not intentional with the kids, or, I said this to you and I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
She'd be like, whoa, who is this guy?
You want brownie points as a husband?
Yeah.
Whew.
That's major brownie points because
Yeah.
you're reflecting. And I think a lot of growing as a man is you have to be able to self-reflect on the things that are going
Mm-hmm.
well and the things that aren't.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to course correct and not wait for somebody to tell you that what you're doing is wrong.
Yeah. And having humility in that,
Yeah.
being able to be corrected, to be kind of shift your thinking. Hey, I didn't approach that the right way, or how would you have liked me to approach it? Things that allow us to grow and become the man that we want to be. I mean, I think internally and deep down, I think all men really do want to be good men, good fathers, good friends, all of the above, be good employees. I think that's all part of it. One thing, and I don't mean to make a sharp turn here, but one thing that I love about our dynamic is the way that you were raised and the way that I was raised are vastly different.
Very
And I
different.
think and ironically we grew up in the same city. We didn't know each other, but ironically we grew up in the
Dago,
same city.
shout
Yeah.
out.
Shout out. And we had very different upbringings. We had different relationships with our father. And I think just for context to allow people to get to know us a little bit, I'd love to hear a little bit of your story and maybe how that impacts you today as a father, like how that enables you and pushes you to be the father that you are today.
Absolutely. And I think to the last part of your question, I think that's changed over time, and I'll get into that. But growing up, my mom and my biological dad got divorced when I was a baby. So I don't remember a time when they were ever together. And then my biological dad was absent most of the time. And when he was around, when I'd see him, he was abusive, whether it be mentally, emotionally, physically, just a very abusive guy, and really tore me down as a kid. And to me, it was like always toughen up, toughen up. So that soundtrack was playing in my head a lot as a kid. But as I grew up and as I started to think about marriage, as I got married, as we started to think about children, as we had children, I was always trying to not be like my biological dad. That was my
Yeah.
motivation. It
Yeah.
was just like, hey, be anything but that. But I think the problem in that was I didn't know who I was. I just knew who I didn't want to be. So for me as a dad, I really had to take inventory and I had to think, okay, well, I know I'm not going to abuse my wife. I know I'm not going to abuse my kids. That's a given. But also, since I didn't learn how to be an effective dad and father over
Mm,
that time, I've really had to wrestle through that. And I think that's why I have such a passion for it, because I think regardless of how you grew up or who your dad was, like in today's society, I don't think we do a good job of really explaining what it means to be a man or what it means to be a good father. Like we learn by seeing it a lot of the times, or and trying to replicate it, or trying to not do something.
mm,
But we don't have those conversations of what does it mean to be an effective father or
yeah.
husband. So for me, it's been really just analyzing the things that I've done wrong a lot of the time
Mm,
in
yeah.
fatherhood. I'm not a perfect father by any means, nor will I ever be, or a perfect husband. And my wife will be the first one to tell you that. But it's every day. How do you get 1% better? How do you get a little bit better every day? And for me, recently, that's looked like taking inventory of how selfish am I being lately? And how can I change that, and how can I give back to my kids what they need, which is time with me, or how can I give that to my wife? And it's just really, again, like taking stock of all the things in your life and then putting them in a level of importance. One drastic thing lately, I've actually left my job, and a large part of that was because I worked over an hour away, working 6 days a week, and my family was getting little to no time with me. And that's a tough decision, especially as a man. You're like, oh, how am I going to provide? What am I going to do? And I don't have anything lined up next, and it's a scary thing. But I had to put my money where my mouth is, and I had to say, if my family's truly more important, then I have to do something about it. So I think it's taking inventory and actually doing something about it. That's what's going to help you be a successful dad and a successful husband.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I think it's cool too, because you kind of sprinkled in there. We can pray for you. We can join you for the journey to see where you land and where the Lord takes you, man. But
Make sure to
yeah,
like and subscribe on this podcast. So shameless plug right there. Let's monetize this thing.
yeah. Sponsored by Beats by Dre.
Not actually a sponsor. Please don't sue us.
It's like, it's like, but for real. No, I'm kidding. But no, dude, that's yeah. I think it's really cool how we can come to that same point in our fatherhood where it's like it doesn't matter where you came from. It doesn't matter how you were raised. I mean, it does, but it can't stop you from becoming a good father. Really, that's God's design for us, is to be good men, to be good fathers. And no matter where we came from, we still have the ability to do that. And I think we should just change the title of this, is take inventory. I feel like that's been a huge theme of this podcast. And one thing that I love to do is also for context, I used to be a youth pastor, and one of the ways that I used to teach my kids is at the end of every lesson or session, I'd give them some sort of challenge. Hey, this week, this is how I want to challenge you. If you were to think of maybe a way to challenge our listeners to take inventory, how do you practice that in your journey, in your day to day? How do you practice that, taking inventory and kind of realizing, hey, these are some of the shortcomings that I had daily, weekly, monthly, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I would say if you haven't got to the point where you're aware of what those things are, ask
Mm,
somebody. If you're married, ask your wife. If you're not married and you don't have kids, ask a close friend. Hey, what are some ways that I've fallen short in this past week or this past month? And then over time, you can start to recognize and realize patterns in yourself, and you just have to spend time doing it, self-reflection. So my challenge would be not only to take inventory, but the second part of what I said earlier was to do something about it. And I think a very practical thing was what we already talked about: 5 minute free time. Take that for yourself. If you have kids, come home, say a prayer before you walk in, give each of your kids 5 minutes of your uninterrupted time, just you and them. And if you don't have kids, do that with your wife. Walk in the door for 5 minutes, put your phone down, sit there, look in her eyes, and talk to her. I guarantee you she's going to be like, who are you and what have you done with my
who is
husband?
this guy? That's awesome. I love that you do that. I'm absolutely stealing that this week, and I will report back next week on how different my life is, how much better of a husband I am.
Hopefully it's better, man. Ah,
Oh, that's good
But
stuff.
I think we should, as we wrap this up, I think
Yeah.
we should just talk about, like I said earlier, the legend himself, Jesus Christ.
Mm,
And one of my favorite verses about Jesus is when he's describing himself in Matthew chapter 11. And he's just saying, I'm gentle and lowly at heart, or some translations say humble. I'm gentle and humble at heart. And Maybe that's another challenge to you. Be like Jesus in that way this week. And that's a way you can take inventory. Would your wife or your kids describe you as gentle? Would your friends describe you as humble? Would your coworkers describe you as humble? And if the answer is no to that question, start thinking about why that is and how you can change it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. One thing that I'm still workshopping the name of this little segment at the end, but rapid fire questions.
What
I
do we
want to I
call
want
it?
to
Blasted by Blake? Is that on the
Oh
table
God,
still?
stop it. No, it's not on the table. That has been permanently removed from the table, thrown in the trash, and burned. But no, I wanna do this thing where I start a timer, ask you some rapid fire questions that you don't know previously, and kind of hear your thoughts and feedback. So, is that cool with you if I run that?
Hopefully, I have the answers and I don't fail the test.
You won't, because you're such a perfect father. You take so much inventory. I believe in you.
That is not true, but thank you.
All right, here we go. What qualities do you think are essential for a man to embody, and why?
I think humility, we talked about it. I think selflessness is another characteristic. Again, putting others' needs above your own. Again, not saying that your needs aren't important, but just valuing others' needs more than yours. I think that's going to help you be a successful man.
What's your favorite fast food?
Chipotle, no question.
How do you define emotional strength in men?
I would say a man who's vulnerable. I think that's something we shy away from as men, that vulnerability, that willingness to share, that willingness to cry. Again, you don't have to cry all the time, but man, be vulnerable. Be willing to share how you're feeling. I think that's so important. And I think it's something we don't do very well as men.
Would you rather skydive or ride a bull?
Ride a bull.
Favorite movie of all time?
I thought about this one, Mr. 300. You ever,
Oh,
3,000, 300, 3,000, whatever that one is. Bernie
it can't be
Mac.
your favorite if you don't even know the title.
I can't remember how many zeros there are.
I think, well, because it's under
It's what? Andre,
ah,
yeah. Okay.
under 3,000.
Yep, 3,000. Mr. 3,000. You're right.
So, man, this was awesome. Episode one.
In the
I'm really
books.
excited for this. I'm looking forward to kind of growing and learning along the way, and sharing even real time where we're at in the
Yep.
journey. And looking forward to, like, we have people that we want to bring on the pod that are further seasoned in their fatherhood, their manhood, that I think we can glean from as well. So really looking forward to this, and just excited to be here, man.
Absolutely. And like Blake said, we're learning in this journey too. So we get to do this alongside you guys. And it's crazy to me that if one person listens to this podcast, that they'll want to listen to just two dudes, one sitting in a closet, one sitting in a random room,
Dude,
just
this is an
just
office.
talking. Yeah, the office. But for all those of you out there listening, maybe it's one person, please like, subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening to it on. We're going to try to get it out to all the streaming services and YouTube as well. So if you can give us a like wherever you're listening to and follow us, we'd love it. Awesome. Episode 1, and we're out.
We're out.